Hi, good morning, good evening, good afternoon. Um, I'd just like to apologise for yesterday. I got a bit too carried away in my frustrations, and I'd just like to say yes, that Europe coming back to Christianity is the answer. But you need to understand you're not going to save your countries. It's done, it's written. Like, it's gone too far now. You had all the time in the world to realize that your countries are the bad guys. They have gone around the world stealing, killing, destroying, and basically coming back to Christianity. You have to do it properly. You have to do it properly. None of this pretending business. None of this just going to church on Sunday. You have to do it properly. Read Isaiah 58. What else did I want to say? Yes, I'm sorry for my outburst, basically. And like I said, we know that Britain's not going to do the right thing until until they're freed from America. Until America goes, then a lot of countries are going to realize they're on their own now. Because America's like that main bully, you know. And then all the others just go along with what he does. But like I've always said, I have faith in Britain that they're going to do the right thing eventually. I think I've been saying it all throughout this channel. And it's there in the scriptures as well. So we're just waiting for that penny to drop. But it's all about saving yourselves. Saving yourselves. God judges whole nations. You know this. I explained that yesterday. And all you could do is basically save yourselves. Try and put your bloodline in the next empire, the next stage of humanity, the next kingdom. It's up to you now, basically. It's up to you. But you need to admit, and you need to see it. We're going to get to that. So, chapter 13, the mark. Many of the European disciples who joined Mary Teresa's tribe, which also included North Africa, had considerable wealth, which could be shared not only with the poorer members of Africa, but also with the tribes in other parts of the Third World. But getting funds from one place to another was not easy. Sorry. Europe led the Third World in adopting the mark. Europe led the Third World in adopting the mark. See, I'm telling you, this is why America has to go. This is why America will be destroyed. This is why people will gang up against America and they'll all let it happen. Because Americans have guns and they don't want to have a decades-long civil war over this mark thing. So once it's done, Not many other countries don't have guns. This has been happening over the centuries, taking people's guns away, taking people's freedoms, their rights away, getting people slowly docile. Europe led the third world in adopting the mark, a microchip implant that was gaining in popularity throughout the world because of its efficiency. The 12 tribes, like the Jessens before them, were opposed to the use of credit cards, smart cards, and especially using the mark. Now just remember, this book was written almost 24 years ago. So I'm going to replace smart cards with smartphones. The 12 tribes, like the Jessens before them, were opposed to the use of credit cards and smartphones, and especially using the mark. This made commercial transactions very difficult for all the tribes, but especially for European members. The position taken by the 12 tribes came from a prophecy and a curse which appear in the 13th and 14th chapters of Revelation. He, the Antichrist, causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads, so that no one may buy or sell, save he that he had the mark, or the name of the beast, or the number of his name. Revelation 13:15-16. If anyone worship the beast and his image, and receive his mark on their forehead or in their hand, they shall drink of the wine of the wrath of God, which is poured out without mixture into the cup of his indignation, and they shall be tormented with fire and brimstone in the presence of the holy angels. And in the presence of the Lamb, the smoke of their torment ascends up forever and ever, and they have no rest day or night, who worship the beast and his image, and whoever receives the mark of his name. Revelations 14:9-11. Without the mark, it was difficult for Chloe or Sister Mary or anyone in the tribe to make the simplest purchases. Rayford and Chaim did not teach that credit cards or smartphones were necessarily wrong, but they taught that the true believer would want to err on the side of being too cautious, rather than making excuses to move closer and closer to taking the mark. See, I translate that as people, we're on the rebellion already. We don't care. We don't care. We're not hiding. We don't care anymore. We ain't conforming. We're not hiding. And we ain't complaining. We expect this. We've been waiting for this for years. We expect it. We're reading this book and we're waiting for it to get closer and closer. We expect nothing more, nothing less. And we know it's going to get worse. The hard part was that so much business had to be done outside the generally accepted channels. Sister Mary became quite adept at dealing through the black market, although it meant paying very high prices. Although some evangelical Christians had, in the past, promised to oppose the mark when it came in, as soon as it became clear that it was going to cost them personally, they adopted other arguments to justify using it, as they had done previously with credit cards and smart cards. I'm going to change that and say, as they had done previously with the lollipop, the clot shot, and the snake oil. The most common argument was to say that a living God would never punish anyone forever and ever, especially not for doing something so innocent as buying or selling. But this is what they do. They weave it into your lives. They weave it into your lives. They weave it into your lives so that it looks harmless. It looks innocent. You know? It's becoming impossible to not have a smartphone. Everywhere you go, people want you to have a smartphone. Scan the QR code, do this, do that, go to the machine. Da, da, da. You must have an email address. I'd like the right to live off grid and to be able to do things the old-fashioned way. There should be a section where I can fill this in manually. Give me a piece of paper. But no, it's like you have to have a smartphone. I lived almost 6 months without a smartphone. I was fine. And then they made me get a smartphone. They made me get a smartphone. The job centre can't give people extra money to pay to heat their house. They can't give them extra money to put food in the fridge, but they give you money to get a smartphone. Does that make sense? This is how I know sinister things are happening. Like I said, they'll give you £10 off a bottle of whiskey in Tesco's if you get the club card. It's all about information. It's all about tracking exactly what you're doing, seeing what you're doing. You can't get an appointment at the doctor's without phoning in first or doing the appointment online. They're so nosy. They want to know everything. They want to know everything. And I want the right to live off grid. But they're making it into our everyday lives. So we conform. One line of reasoning said that Christians could take the mark without necessarily worshipping the devil. And as long as they did not sell their soul to the devil, the grace of God would compensate for their treachery. One line of reasoning said that Christians could take the mark without necessarily worshipping the devil. As long as they did not sell their soul to the devil, the grace of God would compensate for their treachery. In its purest form, the argument stated that even if they did worship the Antichrist or sell their soul to the devil, providing they had said a magical prayer asking Jesus into their hearts before selling out, God would be forced to forgive them. The people preach that same thing and say that you're saved. Oh, just ask Jesus into your life and you're saved. That you have to start living that way. The teaching had been used to justify greed, pride, lust, dishonesty, self-righteousness, and every other sin you could think of for many decades before the mark came in. So it was only natural that it should be extended to take in that form of disobedience as well. The mark took a number of different forms. By far, the most popular was the tiny implant, just under the skin, on the back of the right hand. Come on, people, we've seen this already. We've seen this in Sweden, Chip Girl and all these things. Like, this book was written... Technology had succeeded in making a little biochip or passive transponder that was so small that it was almost microscopic. Well, not quite. They say it's the size of a rice grain. It contained a universal PIN number, which was unique for each bearer. With the mark in its place, a person's right hand could be waved in front of a scanner using low-frequency radio waves to verify the number before funds were added or subtracted from a person's bank account. Like I said, 20 years ago, like, this is even before smartphones. Like, we barely had... It was just chip and pin. Like, we didn't even have contactless then. This was done each time you wanted to buy or sell something. An alternative mark was available for amputees or others who could not use their right hand for other reasons or another. People with cerebral palsy as well, you know. These people could have a microchip implant under the skin of their forehead so that they could just put their head in front of the scanner to authorize sales and purchases. The third alternative was for people who usually, because of their great wealth, feared someone might kill and skin them. Sorry. In an attempt to locate their transponder, authorities assured the public that this would be virtually impossible because the implants were extremely difficult to retrieve after they had been injected, and because a scanner would recognize anyone with two implants and it would refuse to process them. Nevertheless, if people insisted on not accepting the implant, then they had the option of having a visible tattoo, quantum dot, a visible tattoo on their hand, so to signify that they had been officially declared and certified legally exempt from verification implant, which was abbreviated DCLXVI, or 666 in Roman numerals. People choosing the quantum dot tattoo were also to manually punch in their PIN number into scanning machines, as it had been done in the old days before the mark. That wouldn't work either. Two-step verification, it wouldn't work. The only thing which is going to work, which they've already done, they're already set up, screens everywhere. As soon as you scan your thing, it's going to be facial recognition as well, so people can't chop off your hand and use your chip everywhere. Screens everywhere. It's just as soon as you scan, your face is going to come up. People choosing the tattoo were allowed to manually punch in their PIN number into scanning machines, as it had been done in the old days before the mark. The only other exception was Deng Chao himself, who needed only to use his name as identification. He had neither a tattoo nor an implant. Chloe and Sister Mary found that, even with Europe's widespread use of the mark, the members had each failed to accept the importance. The members each had failed to accept the implant. Or the tattoo, or one reason or other. Let me start again completely, because this is good. Chloe and Mary Teresa found that, even with Europe's widespread use of the mark, new members had each failed to accept the implant or the tattoo for one reason or another. For some, it seemed merely coincidental, because they knew nothing about the spiritual significance of what had been happening in the banking world. These amazing coincidences deepened the movement's conviction that God had been intervening in each of their lives to protect them from the mark nevertheless. Rayford and Chaim were quick to educate all members on the seriousness of what was happening, and on their need to be prepared to die before they would ever accept the mark. The recruits had credit cards and or smartphones, and in some exceptional instances these were used to do business on a temporary basis. This was particularly true for the European bases. Wherever possible, however, transactions were done with cash. Credit cards and smart cards were gradually destroyed. The banks had brought in measures which complicated things for people still dealing in large sums of money, paying for airline tickets, rent, printing vehicles, and even food and clothing. With cash also led to delays and sometimes forced the believers to pay higher than normal prices. I'm going to skip this section because Irene, who had somehow escaped participating in any such activity while she and Rayford had operated from the flat in Guildford, was apprehensive. She first squeezed behind the big industrial bin in order to get a foothold on the fence next to it before climbing in. But then, just as she was about to lift herself up, she saw movement inside the bin itself, and she froze. There in front of her was a withered old woman dressed in several layers of rags, whose hair was unkempt and her face black with dirt. The two women stared at each other in shock, but it was the filthy, bedraggled bag lady who spoke first. "Irene!" she shouted in amazement, and then she recoiled almost immediately, as if though from shame. Irene was speechless. How did this strange, almost frightening woman know her name? And then she saw something in the woman's eyes, which she recognized. "Elaine! Is that you? Is that you, Elaine?" Irene leaned forward into the bin to hug the poor woman, who had begun to cry, both from fear and from relief. By the time Rayford came looking to see what was taking so long, Elaine had told most of her story. What had been missed was told and retold back at the flat when the bin excursion had ended. Elaine Billings had been able to use Tom and Betty's car and money. So remember back at when they were on their way to Montana, before Irene took the pastor's gun and she took his car and she took the old man and the two kids and her son, and they went to Canada instead of going to Montana. So this is starting from then. Elaine Billings had been able to use Tom and Betty's car and money to get fuel and to drive herself and her husband to Montana, from where they had left Irene in North Dakota. But Vernon had died from the effects of radiation only a week after they had arrived. This is so good, this is so good. These pilgrims who had reached Montana had quickly broken into factions when it became clear that there was no Messiah to be found. A couple of deluded souls had tried to pass themselves off as Jesus, while others insisted that they only needed to give God more time, and their dreams would come true. On the whole, it was a sorry, deluded lot of pilgrims. Remember, I keep telling you guys, it's so important to know the truth about this book. There's Project Blue Bean coming. If you don't believe we're the people, you can end up in situations like this. But if you want to go your own way, you're going to go your own way. Like, what more can we say? What? It's up to you, like, seriously. couple of deluded souls had tried to pass themselves off as Jesus, while others insisted that they only had to give God more time and their dreams would come true. On the whole, it was a sorry, deluded lot of pilgrims. Most, like Elaine, were torn between losing their faith altogether and struggling to rebuild it on the basis of different criteria. Many of them died there in Montana before rescue teams came by helicopter to take them out of the country several weeks later. But we know you're going to stay in your stubborn ways, like, but it's poetic justice. See, if you could just come, just sit and wait for more poetic justice, like, just sit and listen. It may have been good luck or just poor management that had brought Elaine to England. She had come on the understanding that she had a cousin there who would take responsibility for her. But in the confusion of the time, the authorities, many of whom who were just volunteers, had done little to check out the background to her claim. When she arrived, Elaine discovered that her cousin, a penniless recluse, had died of a heart attack more than a year previously. Now, why is her cousin penniless? Is it because of stuff that's happening today? A recluse? They died alone? It sounds like her cousin was probably a believer as well, seeing as she was. You know, can you see it? Can you see it? Elaine discovered that her cousin, a penniless recluse, had died of a heart attack more than a year previously. She was all alone in a country whose charity was already stretched to near breaking point. So now Britain is now stretched to breaking point because of all the American refugees. Elaine had made no effort to link up with or seek aid from any church or charity, choosing rather to work out her own salvation on the streets. Despite her shocking appearance and confused mental state, Elaine possessed a strength of character that had not only carried her through the past year and a half, but had been partly born out of the circumstances in which she had found herself. Elaine quickly regained what's... You see, these are affluent Americans, right? Are you ready? Elaine quickly regained what sanity she had lost through her ordeal, because they had both been through such similar spiritual pilgrimages. She and Irene became closer than any two sisters. Irene saw her new companion as a blessing from God in replacement for the son and daughter that she had waved farewell a few months earlier. Elaine was warmly accepted into the tribe of Joseph as part of the Guildford administrative team. But back to Chloe's lesson on survival. Stealing was a pastime that Elaine had become expert at. After a year and a half on the streets, she had a host of hopeful tips about living out of bins and surviving, but she was also good at bartering. She had learned to pick up little treasures that she found and then later trade them with the right people for food, clothing, sometimes even a night's shelter, although she relied mostly on begging to get shelter. Bartering was a handy way to circumvent the mark, especially when members of the 12 tribes were forsaking possessions that they had no need for in their new lifestyles. In later years, they would most often do this to get clothing and food. If they were prepared to take a big loss, there was always someone prepared to give them what they needed in a lopsided swap. You see, people who have taken the mark are now like taking extra away from people, taking extra. So, you know, we talk about like a week's wages for a loaf of bread. This is what we're talking about. Handing over a Rolex watch for, you know, something simple like a pair of shoes. When you should be able to get a lot more for that. People are really going to be... Unfortunately, bartering did not work with large purchases like travel tickets and motor vehicles because of the paperwork associated with it. Consequently, the 12 tribes were told by their spokesman to brace for a time when they would have to live without such luxuries. We're getting used to that now, mate. We're getting used to that now. We live in it. We're getting used to that right now. Technically, the believers had until 3.5 years before the temple agreement had been signed, before they would be forced totally outside of the economic system. But in practice, the test had already begun, especially for those living in the affluent West. The Jessens and a few others like Elaine, who had been living outside the system prior to the agreement, were the recognized experts on how to survive in an alien world. They had benefited greatly from having rejected credit cards and smartphones, both forerunners of the mark. We do not need any more information about the mark than what is found in the Gospels, wrote Chaim Rosenberg in Australia. The mark is never mentioned there, he went on, but there in the teachings of Jesus, we are told to be like the flowers and to be like the birds, who do not have jobs, who do not plant fields, and do not weave cloth. God feeds them, and he will feed us if we put his work first. If only we had taken that much more seriously decades ago, we would be so much more prepared for what is about to happen now. This is what's happening now with them crushing us. You know, putting up your gas, the more expensive food is, you know, the price of everything going up. It's not giving you time to prepare and resources to prepare, you know. You can't buy these extra things, plus live, plus pay your rent. Not allowing you to prepare. But they can prepare so their children inherit the earth, yeah? This is why you need God on your side, because this is the game they're playing. Starve us out so their children inherit the earth. And this is why God is coming, but you need to be on his side. Chaim taught that the most of the suffering that would take place amongst believers during the approaching Great Tribulation would be the result of disobedience of the teachings of Jesus now. The Antichrist will not have to hunt us down, he said. Those with shallow faith are already lining up to receive his mark. Others who are brave enough to refuse the mark will starve or freeze to death without any action on the part of the Antichrist himself. Like I keep saying, they're not worried about certain people. They know you're just going to line up eventually. They know you're going to miss your lifestyle. They know you're not going to want to lose your house, your car, your swimming pool, your summer house, you know. They know you're going to want your gym membership. Those of you who have illnesses and need to take medicine and, they're not worried. They're not worried. What they're worried about is the rebels. They know who we are. They keep in checking on us. They know who we are. Every time we do something like being seen at a protest, every comment you make online, every time you stand up for what you believe in, every person who's now no longer watching porn and is now reading the Bible, he purchased the Bible, every person who's their credit cards, their bank cards are not being used on a Saturday. They're making lists. They know who you are, and you're the ones they're worried about. They're not worried about all these other people. They're not worried. It will happen because they never learned how to hear from God and how to obey Him from day to day. That's what we are learning now. But those who run away from such discipline now will pay dearly. Crikey, I'm running out of time. They will pay dearly for it in the next few days. In the next few years, sorry. It will pay dearly for it for the next few years. Okay, end of chapter. Zion Ben Jonah writes, the mark of the beast is so close to reality that debates amongst those who say it is not fulfillment of Revelations 13:15-17 deal only with the technicalities. No doubt there will be changes in implant and scanner technology over the next few years, but not even the skeptics would deny that the business world is committed to eventually using this form of marketing technology that was predicted in the Bible nearly 2,000 years ago. And the prophecy says that the technology comes from the Antichrist. Either you act on that information or you toss God and the Bible out. Considering the dire warning that the prophecy gives about accepting the mark, one would have to be virtually dead spiritually to continue with the materialistic lifestyle that so much of the world includes. That so much of the world, including almost all churchgoers, continues to pursue and to take for granted today. This is why we're happy. We don't care. Even if we have to stay away from women because women want comfort, women want the pleasures in life, women want a man with ambition and blah, blah, blah. Sorry, ladies, but we got a job to do. We ain't taking no mark. We know the future. We see the future. We know what's coming. We ain't putting that. We're putting that aside. We staying strong. We are steadfast. So you go and carry on climbing the ladder in Babylon. You seek ambition. You seek to find your place, to find your way. You look forward to the new digital future, not us. So we don't care. We're happy now. We're looking to the next world. At the moment, for most of the West, it is not as though they would have to risk death or in order to just play it safe and live as the early Christians did. There is abundant wealth in our society, and there are a host of safety nets to help anyone who might wish to experiment with a lifestyle which is more concerned with spiritual things than it is with getting a new wardrobe or a bigger car, but still they choose to reject the way of Jesus. With or without the mark, the world, again including the churches, continues to put its faith in and to spend its life working for the tokens that they wrongly believe will buy them happiness.